Hey everyone, and welcome to the second video in the Godot typing game tutorial series. My name's Joe, and in this video we're going to cover coloring the text below an enemy based on what the player types, spawning multiple enemies, and then moving those enemies leftward across the screen. So the first thing that we have on our agenda today is to actually add some colored text to show the player and give them some input about what they're typing. So I've already gone and added some colors to our enemy. I basically just got blue, which is steel blue, and then a couple other colors that look good with it to kind of give a nice, like, somewhat pastel-y vibe. So feel free to copy these down if you want here. I just made them export variables in case we wanted to tweak them or change them, but just to add some color that we can show the player. And my thought is that we will show all of the previously typed characters in blue that the player has already typed, and we'll show the current character to type in green, and then the ones to type in red. And you could do something a little bit more fun with this, like maybe you could, if you type a mistype a character, you could have it flash red or do something like that. But for now, we'll just do something basic like this. So now that we have our colors, what we can do is come into our enemy, and we're going to need a function in here that actually allows us to set these colors. And so I'm going to add another function after getPrompt, which we can just call set next character. And it's going to take a next character index, which will be an integer. And we're going to use that to determine where we need to put each of our color codes. And so the way this is going to work is we're going to say prompt.parse bbcode, and we're going to give it a BB code string to parse. So there's two functions that come with a rich text label that you can use to set text. One is parse BB code and one is append BB code. If you use append, it will take whatever you pass into it and add it to the end, but with parse, it'll completely rewrite what's there. And that's pretty much what we want. We want to scrap what's there and then redo it with new BB code placement. So before we actually pass anything into our parse BB code function, I want to actually build up each part of the string we'll pass in, which is basically we want to build up 3 different sections for each color. And in order to do that, I'm first going to make another helper method, which I will call function gets BB code color tag. And so we're going to just pass in a color here. And what it's going to do is just return a string that will contain that color tag, so we don't have to build it up ourselves each time. So we will do return color equals, we don't want this, and we'll do color.toHTML, and we'll pass in false. So what we're doing here is, because our colors are of the type color, they're not actual strings, we actually need to get this HTML string right here, and that's this function we're using here. So that'll return the string that we see in the brackets here. And then by passing in false, this argument is saying whether it should include the alpha there. So if we passed in true or just didn't pass anything, we would get these strings, but there'd be an FF in front because they have full opacity or full alpha. And we don't want that. We just want the color string itself. So that's what we're calling there. And then we will just end that. There we go. And so now we can just call this function and we'll get a color tag that's formatted as we need. And we'll just make another helper function. So get BB code end color tag. This is pretty, this isn't necessary, but I'm just going to do it just to have it. And we will return, color, end of color. So now we have a function that will create a tag and then end it. And so all we have to do now is just insert the text rather than having to build this up manually every single time. Okay, so now that we have our helper functions, we're ready to actually build out our string here. So we'll start with our blue text. So I'll save our blue text, and I will set this to be get BB code color tag, which will pass in blue, and then we will add as our actual string. So what we're going to need to do here is get our prompt text, and we'll do substring, and we will, so this is our blue text, so it needs to start at the beginning. So we'll start at 0, and we'll go up to the next character index. So if it's the first one, it'll be 0 with a length of 1, so we'll just get the first character and it'll work out. And we'll do get BB code end color tag. Okay, so just like that, we've got our blue text. And now I'm just going to copy this and do pretty much the same thing with our green and red. So let's do our green. We have some pretty long lines here, but that's all right. So let's do this. And I guess I should note that this is definitely not the most efficient use of, we're building up a ton of strings here, but our game is so small it doesn't really matter. You can worry about better string optimization later on if that's something you need. But so our blue text is good. Now we need to adjust our indices for our green text. So we're always going to have green text, right? Because as soon as we're always going to have one character to type, and if we type the whole word, then the enemy will disappear. So we can always assume we'll have green text. So we're going to start this at our next character index, and it's always going to have a length of 1 because we only want it to show the next character. And then for our red text, we need to do a little bit more handling here, because if we are at the end of the word, we don't want to actually show any red text because there's only going to be one character left to type. So what I'm going to do is just say var red text equals an empty string. And normally one thing I do here is use a ternary operator for this, but Godot's ternary syntax isn't my favorite thing. It's kind of tedious, so I'm just going to do an actual if statement here. And then we'll say if next character index equals prompt text.length. So if we're at the end of our prompt, if the next character is the last one, then we need to say not, then we can set red text to this. So we're assuming that we're at the end of the word, and then if we end up not being at the end of the word, we can actually set our red text to this. And so the actual BB code string we're going to pass in is just going to be this plus green text plus red text. So we're just building up all these sections, and then we're just going to pass them in. There we go. So there's two more things we need to make sure we do before we try this. One is I actually am realizing I forgot to add a hashtag here. So this string that's going to get printed out is just the letters and the numbers that make it up. I won't actually include the hash, so we'll need that there. And then we're also going to need, when we do this, to start off by saying center, and then we'll have to add that closing tag at the end. This will make sure that our text always stays center, which, whoops, did I forget something? Yep, I forgot to add that. And this will make sure that we don't lose the center of our text as we are typing. Now we're ready to actually go back to our main script and plug this in. So we need to call this setNextCharacter method whenever we are typing something new. So first, whenever we already have an active enemy down here and we type a new character that works, we need to change our current active character. Okay, setNextCharacter. Just want to make sure I got that right. It means setNextCharacter, and we'll pass in the current letter index here. So whenever we increment this, we are passing it in. And I suppose there should also be current character index, but we'll let that slide for now. And let's call this again up here. When we first discover an enemy, we can call this here, which is good. Another thing we'll need to make sure we do, actually we can just do that now, is make sure that once we find an active enemy, we stop iterating through all these children. We don't want to find multiple active enemies. And we'll do that by just typing return here. So when we find a new active enemy, we'll set the index, we'll set the next character, and then we'll just return so we break out of this loop. Okay, and we should be good to try this now. And, oh, whoops, you know what I totally forgot to do? I bet. Yeah, so when we were changing this, I totally forgot to change where we start our red text. So what this needs to happen is we need to start this at our next character index plus 1, and then have the length be prompt text.length, and then we will subtract next character index plus 1. Okay, so now when we do this, we should see that it correctly works, and then we're done. So this is great, guys. This looks really good. So once you find an active enemy, it'll change the color so you can tell, and it'll give you feedback as you type. It would be kind of nice to get some feedback when you incorrectly type a letter, but maybe that's something we can work on in the next video. But yeah, that's great. Looks good. Looks like we're ready to move on to the next thing. So that next thing we're going to do is going to be actually making our enemies move leftwards. So we're going to have our enemies spawn on the right side of the screen and then slowly move to the left over time. So first thing we need to do with that, let's add another export variable so we can tweak it from the editor if need be. We'll make this a float variable speed, and we'll set this to 0.1. So we're going to make this a float because our enemy is not a kinematic body. It's just a sprite right now. You could make it a kinematic body, but we just didn't really need to. And so when you move a kinematic or a sprite or something that isn't a kinematic body, you're just moving it straight, moving its position itself. You're not actually setting a velocity based on time or a vector. And so it tends to need a lot of smaller values because you're directly giving it pixels or units to move. And so we'll start at 0.1 and go from there. So I'm going to go function, we'll grab the physics process here, and then we'll just say global position dot x minus equals speed. And then the goal is probably in the next episode we'll get to kind of progressively making it harder so more enemies spawn and our enemies move a little bit faster. But now if we look at this, we're going to see that our enemy moves, but it's kind of twitchy, like it'll go forward and lurch back a little bit. I don't know if it's super visible through YouTube, but it's kind of janky. And one way we can fix that is going to my project settings, come down to rendering here, and this use pixel snap option. So if we turn that on and try running it now, we'll see it move a lot more smoothly. It's moving in very small increments now, not kind of back and forth and really weird looking. So there we go. That's really simple enemy movement, and they'll move to the left. And eventually we'll, have some kind of an area or something here that detects when an enemy enters it so that we can have a lose condition for the player. So I'll close this. Okay, cool. Okay, so now I want to add some spawns for our enemies. So what I'm going to do is add another Node2D container, and I'm just going to call this enemy spawn, or just same, we'll say spawn container to follow the nomenclature we've been using. I'm going to drag this up above here. And I'm just going to add a position 2D. Let me go to the move mode or hit W, and I'll move our position 2D to right here. And I'm just going to duplicate this a few times and then move these down a little bit just so we have a couple different spawn lanes. And you'll notice that the distance between like the top and bottom of our enemy, we don't really want to have them overlapping. So I'm only going to have 5, I think, just to give us enough room in between. So I'll move this one right here. We also don't want it to be off screen, and we can do some quick testing with this in just a second. And what you would probably do in a more dynamic game would be to give, oh whoops, I did these out of order, oh well. You'd probably want to have a box or an area where you'd get a random location and spawn from there. But for this, it's not really a huge deal, so we can just do this and it should work out just fine. And let me move this up a little bit. So let's make sure that it shouldn't really matter. And if we get some overlap, that's really not a big deal because you can type and get rid of an enemy. So let's just take a look here, make sure. All right, so if we spawn here, we are going to be on the screen, which is good. And this one won't really, it might overlap a little bit, but that's fine. That's fine. And if we spawn here, so I need to move all these down a little bit. Let's just grab these. Sometimes it's just like this, where you just gotta do a little bit of tweaking. And let's move our bottom one down just a tiny bit. Okay, how are we doing now? So that'll be on the screen. That'll be on the screen. These are all good. This one will be on the screen. Okay, that seems good. I might do a little bit of tweaking to this in between videos, but this is totally fine. We just wanted to get something that works, and now we've got some spawns. Now what we need to do is actually get our enemies to spawn in these positions we made. So the first thing I'm going to do is save our enemy as its own scene, which I'll just call enemy. And then I'm going to delete it. And then if I come into our main script here, let's get a reference to our spawn container. Equals spawn container. And then let's get a reference to our enemy. We'll save our enemy. And we will set this equal to preload. And we'll just give it the path to, oh, whoops. It was right there. There we go. Or the scene file. There we go. Okay, so now we have our spawn container and our enemy. And what I'm going to do is go to our main and add a timer here. And we'll call this spawn timer. I'm going to set the, I'll set it to, not one shot. I'll set the wait time to be 3 seconds to start, and we'll tweak as needed. But basically what's going to happen now is we want to connect the timeout for our spawn timer to our main scene. And we're going to basically spawn an enemy here. So what I'm going to do is when we have a timeout, I'm going to say var enemy instance equals enemy dot instance. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to get a random spawn position, and I'll say, let's say var index equals rand I, and we'll just do a modulo of how many do we have, or I guess we can do we'll do var spawns equals spawn container dot get children. So we'll just do this once, so we only need to call get children once, and then we will do spawns dot length. So whoops, or is it count size? There we go. So basically we're going to get a random number from 0 to the amount of spawns that are available, and we're then going to set our enemy instance that global, whoops, oh my, global position equal to spawns of index. So we're going to grab that spawn and set the global position of our enemy to that spawns, and then the enemy will just start moving right from there. Now we'll also need to actually add our enemy instance as a child of the main scene, or of our enemy container. So we will say enemy container dot add child enemy instance. Okay, cool. So we're going to create an enemy, we're going to add it as a child of our container, and then set it to a random spawn position. Another thing we'll want to do, just to make sure that every time you play, our random numbers, in air quotes, are actually different, is we'll need to call randomize. So I'll actually hook into the ready method of our main, and I will call randomize. And what this is, if you've never used it, it's a built-in Godot method that will change the random number seed so that, you know, every time you run your game, it's not using the same seed, and so it'll actually give it random behavior. Now we also set our spawn timer to be 3 seconds, but we don't really want to wait 3 seconds at the beginning of the game without anything happening, so we will just call spawn, well actually let's what I'm gonna do is just say function spawn enemy, and I'm gonna just pull all the logic for this out and put it in here, and then I'm just gonna call spawn enemy from here. And what this is gonna let us do really easily is then in our ready, we will randomize and we'll spawn an enemy. So we'll have an enemy right at the beginning of the game. And one thing I'm also probably gonna need to do, I'll need to get a reference to our spawn timer. So onReady var spawn timer. Okay, there we go. And we can say spawn timer dot start. Okay, so now if we run our game, we will see that we start with one right off the bat, and then 3 seconds later we start another one, and we'll just let this run for a sec. And so, okay, so we still get a bit of overlap here. I think what it's seeming like now that we're actually playing it is that we really need to increase our movement speed and probably decrease the spawn speed right at the beginning. Let me try typing, and whoops. Okay, so it's there, even if you can't see it. And it does look like it's getting the farthest one to the left, which is what we were hoping would happen. Oh, whoops, I didn't actually, there we go. Yeah, so it's getting the one that is moved the farthest to the left, and it's doing that because we are just getting the enemy that is the highest on our scene tree, or the one that was first spawned. So that's really nice. But let's fix our time a little bit. So let's bump our spawn timer up to be 5, which is a long time for sure, but we will do some tweaking to the difficulty later on. And then let's go into our enemy and let's change our speed. I'll just do it within code from now. So let's start at point, let's give it a pretty big increase. Yeah, that's a lot better. Okay, cool. Yeah, this feels a lot better. Okay, sweet. So I think that's pretty much it as far as getting our enemies to move and spawn. This is really awesome. In the next video, I think we're going to cover a lose condition, doing some basic UI stuff, and then progressively increasing the difficulty. So thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.